everybody. Welcome to Tuesday night in September when it's hot in Wisconsin. I am Michael Munson with Forge, and I'm happy that folks are joining us tonight to talk about a potentially serious subject about having the blues and hopefully figuring out some ways that we can change that color a little bit. So we have tonight with us Joanna Woodbury and Carolyn Wesolowski from the Medical College of Wisconsin, and so they're going to do most of the leading tonight after we get us kind of situated and our housekeeping done. So again, I'm Michael Munson with Forge, and we have, everybody is in listen-only mode other than who you see on the screen. If you'd like to see, there's 4 of us on the screen right now. You can click on gallery view versus speaker view, depending on what you'd like to see. If you'd like to pin our interpreters, our ASL interpreters, you can hover over their image and you can click their little 3 dots and it will allow you to pin them so that you can always see them front and center. We also have closed captioning, so if you'd like to see the closed captions, you can click on the CC button at the bottom of your screen and choose either subtitles or a transcript. So one will show up on the screen or one will show up on the side. So those are the housekeeping bits and pieces. The other housekeeping bit is that we are really grateful to Advancing a Healthier Wisconsin Endowment for funding some of the work that we've been doing during COVID. So I've said this every time, but our partnership with the medical college is faboo, and it's really nice to have a formal opportunity to partner. So one of the ways that folks can interact with presenters tonight and interact with everybody is through the chat area. And I know that many of you have been on many Zoom calls and know where the chat area is, but let us all find that chat area. And how about typing in the answer to when you reflect on your mood, what color and texture is it? So if you want to type in the chat box, when you reflect on your mood, what color and texture is it? So deep blue, featureless. Soft tan corduroy. Rainbows of colors, jagged textures. And I know some people type with their thumbs, so we're just going to give a little bit of space to allow people. Dark and smooth. Depends on the day. Lately have been a lot of denim blue, soft but deep. So I encourage folks to kind of think about what your color is now as we come in. So another person is saying blue and purple gradient, texture is suede, gray and heavy. Yep. So as we move through tonight, I encourage you to think about what your color is, what that texture is, if it changes over time, what you'd like your color to be, and we can probably talk about that as we move forward. So why don't we get rolling? So tonight, again, we have with us Joanna Woodbury from the Medical College of Wisconsin and Carolyn Wesolowski, also from the Medical College of Wisconsin. Is that correct? Like I've put you in the right places. And they are going to lead most of the time, and we'll have some time at the end for questions. And if you'd like to introduce yourselves more than the one-liner of where you work, that would be cool.
Hi, everybody. My name's Joanna Woodbury. I direct social services for the Medical College Inclusion Health Clinic. I'm a social worker by practice and provide support alongside Carolyn in Inclusion Health Clinic.
As Joanna said, I provide social service support to our patients and clients in the Inclusion Health Clinic through Friedert and the Medical College. I'm not a social worker by training, but in practice, I do a lot of what looks like social work, but we'll leave that for another time.
But Carolyn, what is your background in? Because that really, right? The doors open wide.
Sure. Educationally speaking, I have a background in counseling and psychology. So
we figured we would start kind of broadly talking about kind of how do we maintain some healthy balance, because it's incredibly hard right now for all of us around our mental health and our mood and our color, as it were. And then hopefully open it up for understanding what folks would find most helpful as we talk through this. And Michael, we would love for you to be a part of this if you are comfortable.
I would be happy to be part of it, but you're going to start us.
We are. So,
Okay.
Carolyn, do you want to start us off with some of the kind of the 101 self-care basics that are healthy practices that lots of us probably know, but it's a good reminder to get us thinking about how we care for ourselves?
Sure. So I often think of self-care, I mean, it's so broad, right? Folks can identify self-care in an emotional way, in a physical way. They can intellectually take care of themselves in that manner. And so just talking a little bit about ideas, throwing some out there to kind of brainstorm about what people do and can continue to do, or what folks find helpful to both prevent the blues and kind of maintain that, I guess, sunnier disposition. So if we want to talk about how folks do self-care around physical means, a lot of times I think of course, movement, if able. Exercise has been largely proven to increase endorphins in the brain, make use lots of chemicals that are beyond my scope of understanding. But there's also been studies I read recently about taking a warm bath 2 times a week. This is a serious article that I read. That can also have similar effects on mood that improve mood. I think that's a great practice if able to do it. So physical things can also, I think, translate to your environment outside of your physical body. I think that in either maintaining, or I know we're not there yet, but changing one's mood or color, in changing your physical space, if you have the capacity, rearranging where your favorite chair is to have a new perspective while you perhaps read, that can help shift your thinking and your mood as well. So those are just some ideas about physical self-care, some very brief ones. Healthy eating, maintaining a strong, I'm a huge proponent of sleep schedule. I don't know if others have like difficulty sleeping or maintaining their sleep schedule, but I personally am severely impacted when I'm missing sleep or anything like that. I don't know if others want to share their experience around physical techniques they use for self-care that might be helpful to share with folks.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. So in the spirit of using that text chat box,
Yeah.
If our participants want to chime in, some of the things that have worked well for you in moving your physical body or your physical space to help change your mood.
And I invite both you, Joanna, and Michael to share anything that might work for you that others might find of benefit.
I've got one. I'm going to wait and see what we've got.
Perfect.
So I'd be happy to read off what's coming in the chat. So moving or walking. I've been trying to take more breaks and take short walks throughout the day, working at home.
So I think it's a good reminder that our physical space has really been constricted for a lot of us. We've lost a lot of that space that we count on to move our bodies, to get away from maybe the space we live in. And in this time of kind of restriction, that's really closed in on people. And that can be really impactful for our physical well-being, but our mental well-being very specifically. And now we're looking at winter months, right? And so for lots of us, going outside stops being the thing that we do as much during winter months. Oh, I just saw someone mention puzzles. Puzzles are my jam. So I practice something, and I talk this up all the time. Carolyn has heard me say it, and people think I'm ridiculous, but it's a thing. So when feeling overwhelmed or needing that sense of resetting, and it feels different for lots of people, right? Like I describe it as overwhelmed, but that reset button feels needed by in different ways for different people. So you will find me on my office floor approximately 2 to 3 times a week. And if you don't know me, you will walk by and think something terrible has happened. When in reality, there's a lot of studies that show that when we lay our full body down on the ground, if we're able, there are effects on our brain, literally, because when you put pressure on all parts of your body and lay still for 10 minutes, there's brain chemistry that shifts completely. And if you practice it, like you don't even have to sit there and breathe. There are times where you just literally lay on the ground and I've read a book, or sometimes I just stare at the ceiling. It's that physical contact and pressure that's uniform across the body that will reset the brain. That can be really helpful. And so that's something that I talk a lot about with the people who work with me as well, where it's like, if you can't get out and walk, or if you're just feeling overwhelmed working, excuse me, from home, having that 10 minutes to step out of the space and put your entire body on a hard surface and just take some breaths can help reset us completely. It seems nonsensical, but there's an incredible amount of research that shows what happens to the brain when we do that. And once it becomes a practice, the folks I know who have taken it to doing it get pretty like, oh, that's a thing. I'm going to go lay on the ground and, wander off and find a spot on the floor. So I think about that sort of thing as we're starting to consider, already our spaces are confined and we're eventually going to be in a winter, and how do we find healthy ways to reset ourselves in confined spaces?
Can we go back and review what's in the chat? Because I know not everybody's going to have access to that. So let me just read off some of the things. So making a routine and sticking to it, spending time gardening, hands and body busy, seeing growth and beauty, much less lately, which makes sense. I like to challenge myself with projects or hard puzzles. Separating spaces for work, school, and personal time as much as possible. So doing work at desks. And I think that's the list that's come in. Joanna, when you were talking, it reminded me of like the thunder shirts that we put on dogs sometimes. For that, it's not the same as laying flat on the ground, but it's kind of that allowing the pressure or the sensation to kind of go through people. And I know that people are like buying these like soothing heat blanket things that have weight on them. And I think it's similar to what you're saying, not quite the same, but it's the same genre.
Yeah, it's similarly tied to some of the studies that have really kind of pushed things like weighted blankets into more of a mainstream practice use. I think it's different in the sense, like some people either love weighted blankets to help manage anxiety or help manage sleep. That's a huge thing that I would personally endorse, but some people feel like they're being crushed. And so what's different about being able to just lay in a space is like you control that space and you pay attention, like where is the weight going? Am I pushing down in more in one area than not? Is that where I'm holding all of that tension? And even if you don't want to think about those things, because sometimes that's not productive, I don't particularly want to lay on the floor and think about all the things that got me jacked up. It's more the pressure of like just natural laying will do that work for us. So you can sit there and think about whatever the heck you want, and that work is happening internally.
Yeah, and I think you were not starting to, but the idea of solely being in a physical space is really challenging. You can think about each part of your body and the grounding and how that feels. There's still thoughts that are that are there, right? So kind of where that crossover is, you were saying without saying, the practice of mindfulness, if you will, which is very, in a simplistic explanation, just being present in the moment and present in your body, or present outside of your body if you prefer. It's a matter of, it requires practice, but it's a being in the very finite present moment with yourself, and it does take practice. I don't know, Michael, I know you've talked about it quite a bit in my experience, so you might have more to share about it.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things that I oftentimes bring up when we talk about mindfulness is that for a lot of trauma survivors, which a lot of trans folks are, that mindfulness practice can sometimes cause more anxiety. So it's kind of like, how do we find the balance of
Right.
being aware of being present, but without so much that it's increasing our anxiety? So like, where can we find the, okay, I can lay on the floor for 2 minutes. And that's all. I'm not going to try to think about my breath. I'm not going to try to think about anything. I'm just going to try to feel the floor, and that's it. Or I'm going to count the ceiling tiles, or whatever the pieces are. And that's mindfulness. I mean, we don't have to like sit cross-legged and meditate for 2 hours. How can we find those moments of mindfulness? Like, I'll give an example that I use all the time. I love scanning documents, and it sounds really stupid, but I'm this really heady person that I like to think a lot. But I sit there with my 1-page scanner, and I feed pieces of paper, my notes, through the scanner, and then I've got an electronic record, and I feel really good.
Yeah, that's organizing, right? Like
It's
there's
organizing.
a lot there. There's the tactile movement. There's probably a sound that comes with the scanning. And then there's the knowledge that you've now organized something. That makes perfect sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's mindful in that, like, okay, did I put the paper in the right way? I mean, it's really, really simple, but like that is really about mindfulness to me. And it helps me reduce my anxiety.
I loved the comments from folks about doing that really tactile focused piece. I would like Carolyn to talk about what that actually does to our brains if she can, but I adore that. And that I would even say is meditative, right? Like it switches off a certain part of our brain. It requires a different part of us to focus. There's that really fine motor skill, tactile movement of doing puzzles, of knitting, of doing those kind of little works that require focus. And so it's much harder. You can still do it. You can still let all those worries and things whir, but it requires a part of our brain to switch on, which takes more energy than all those worrying worries. And those are just fantastic. I love it.
You wanted me to speak to what specifically, Joanna? Forgive me.
In the brain when we're doing that? I used to be able to speak articulately about it, but I can't anymore.
Yeah. You did very well just speak about it, actually. Yeah, you're using very specific parts of your brain that are, again, this reminds me, Michael, you've spoken of tapping, right? Like there are certain aspects of the brain associated with different parts of the body that, it's also similar to acupuncture and accessing those routes throughout the body. I can't speak again to like the chemical or physiology of what happens in the brain to the degree I think you would like, but I think the focus is really what's grounding for folks and can be calming if that's something that you're seeking in that practice.
I think of all these things, again, as we're easing into fall and fewer sunlight hours and fewer hours outside, how do we start kind of preparing ourselves with tools? Now is the time to stock up on your puzzles and buy your yarn and get the right knitting needles and potentially find other tools that are helpful to you in your space. So things like Carolyn talked about, maybe you rearrange the space. Maybe that's part of that transition of resetting your brain. Maybe you use a special light that plenty of people use that can help our mood when we have less vitamin D coming in, you know, through natural sources. So it's almost like, you know, if you have enough clothes to do it, where you pull out your sweaters and you put away your tank tops. It's a matter of like pulling out those tools that we use to help support our mental well-being during fall and winter months when we have less time to be outside and biking and doing, you know, gardening, doing some of those things that folks listed as being really helpful.
You know, if I can add along the kind of the tactile lines, we've done, you know, some coloring and chatting groups as part of this series. And people have remarked like how wonderful it is. And people come, well, they've got their pens, they've got their pencils. And so clearly it's valuable to people. So it's not like they're just coming for a one-shot deal. But, you know, that's kind of like the stocking up on the supplies that you might need. And there are free coloring pages that you can download, you know, like a zillion of them. And that's just like that really meditative kind of thing where it's tactile, it's changing your brain's function just to be focused on that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is probably a good pivot point to start talking about, you know, we're describing what we do with our bodies and outside of our bodies, and how we support our mental well-being can also be really closely tied to what we put in our bodies, around what we're drinking, what we're eating, when we're drinking, and how all of those things can affect the other pieces, such as our sleep, our ability to focus, our anxiety levels. So I will say, totally transparently, it is super hypocritical for me to talk about this because I'm a sugar addict. Like, that is how I manage. And that's not a helpful way to treat my body. So I know this, and we all have our vices and we all have our things to do. And I think it's really important to also recognize that, like, if we're not doing all the things we know we should do, it's okay. It's really a matter of knowing what our tools are and using them to the best of our ability, because all of us are just doing the best we can. Carolyn, do you want to talk a little bit about just how we're more mindful about eating and what that does to our mood and our sleep?
Am I mute? Yeah, so again, I think what's coming to mind initially, outside of like the direct way that you feel when you eat something, a ton of sugar that it jacks you up for a very short period of time versus that apple with natural sugars, you can feel the difference. So that will carry with you throughout the day. What's coming to mind though, for me, if I may kind of pivot a little bit, is the idea of routine in this time. And I've talked about this before, is controlling what we can control. And you said being okay with those things and coping with what we've got in the moment. So making a diet plan, and not when I say like restrictive or trends or anything like that, but something that you understand that is within limits, and kind of what you can control in that, as well as sleep. I think that routine, someone mentioned it earlier in the chat, that helps them and maintains their mood, and it's a stabilizing thing that when it shifts, folks can really feel it. But I think that control and routine are very important to mood, and what can really display those sorts of things are diet and eating and sleep, are really visible ways about things that we can control.
I would even add too, as we're thinking about this kind of globally, our living space and our mood is affected, right, by our, as we've talked about, activity, food, but also about the people that are potentially sharing those living spaces with us. And recognizing that if someone in my space is practicing things that can jack me up, that makes it really difficult. And so being able to identify that it's not all just us as individuals, it's the things that are happening around us, including the people that might be happening around us. And that doesn't mean that we can just get up and dismiss those relationships or move or any of those things. I say this as I can hear my family upstairs. But acknowledging like where those trigger points are, where those stress points are, and how do we mediate those things, and how do we articulate those things when we're able, and then maneuver around them. So our space is bigger than just us a lot of times.
I think also go ahead, Joanna. No, something else that I did in just thinking about internal controls, that's often where I'm at in this space, in this long-term pandemic and where we're at, is reframing of situations and thoughts, and how I can cope with things in a positive manner as opposed to getting stuck. And so seeing kind of setbacks or things that don't go my way or are out of my control as opportunity for growth, or opportunity for something totally different and totally exciting that I can make the most of. So I think that reframing is part of, is a practice that you can enable or enact to either change your mood or kind of apply to the external situation so that you can go from a different start point, I think. So that's just one kind of technique as well that I like to implement personally.
It's interesting that I think a lot of times we think about what's been harder because of COVID, but I know in my own life I've looked at, well, what is this an opportunity to change? Do I like how I get up in the morning and what I do in the morning? Do I like my routine? Do I have the control to change that? And a lot of times I do have some of those abilities to control those things. So I think sometimes when we're living in this new world, we can look at it as an opportunity instead of like, oh my God, life is really, life really sucks, which it might really suck. But, where is that little nugget of opportunity that we can say, well, I'm going to try this different because I can. When you were talking about like what goes in your body, I was thinking about so many trans folks like don't drink enough water because, we don't want to have to go out in public and like figure out where we're going to pee. Well, if we're stuck at home, if we're working at home, is that an opportunity to start to hydrate our bodies in a way that we may not have ever done, in 20 years? So, where are those opportunities that we can enhance our health and our well-being?
Michael, feel like we're at the halfway point. And so Carolyn and I brought kind of this agenda, but one of the things that we really value in these times is being able to really talk to people, right? Like not one-on-one, but as a group, like what the group needs, what folks want to talk through. So we can keep going, but I think at the halfway point, this might be a good time to hear from folks about what, things that work for them or things that haven't worked for them or things they would like us to strategize with, and just where we can take this, and then maybe that'll help us find the next path rather than us directing the whole thing.
Now you asked about 5 different questions in that.
That's me.
So no, it's good, right? So do you want to hone in on what would people like to talk about, or is that what you were asking? I know you said a lot more than that.
I'm going to let Michael hear my words and pick something from it, because you're right. I have a tendency to say lots of things.
It's good. It's this free-flowing pattern, which is, that's what I like about you. So would folks like to type in the chat, or you can raise your hand, and why don't we start with like, what would you like to hear about? What would you like to talk about? Okay, I'm going to do the same thing that you just did, Joanna. What are you struggling with that you'd like to strategize around? I'm doing exactly what you just did. So we have a couple of folks. So any tips on staying informed without getting depressed? That's an excellent place to start. Why don't we just
That's
do,
a good place to start. Yes, I
yeah,
love that.
let's start with that. And there's
Go
another comment
easy.
after that. Let's start with that one.
Okay. That's so easy to do right now, isn't it? So there's lots of good strategies. I want to acknowledge first that I think this is something that so many of us are struggling with because it's such an important time in our lives to know what's going on. But there's so much coming at us from pretty much any screen, speaker, paper person around us. And I have similar experiences. So I know people who have been like, I'm out, I'm turning it off, I'm not doing any of it. I know people who are like, I'm going to like listen to all of the podcasts and read all of the things. And then there's something in that middle where it's probably a lot healthier to find kind of that cutoff point. So I think there's a lot of analogies we could make, but it's about limiting and like knowing when you're full. And so developing some strategies around how long you're going to look, what your sources are going to be, and what time of day you're going to do it. And I think this can be a really healthy pattern to develop in general, even if we weren't in this thing that we're in right now, because we have this coping strategy as humans these days to use this thing, right, as the thing that keeps us company when we are drifting. And when we drift, it's actually really good for us. Daydreaming is incredibly good for us, and we're not doing it enough anymore because we've got one of these. So identifying what that limit is, maybe 30 minutes every day, know your sources that you're going to go to, and then setting yourself an alarm or giving yourself little cues. I know people who make it so that their Wi-Fi turns off at a certain point, so they have to stop. Now, could they go and reset things and change the passwords and all that? Absolutely, but it's a little trigger to set yourself up to be successful. Excuse me. I know people who block certain websites on their computers or on their phones, just because it's harder then, right? Like, so like, I have a friend who's like was hooked on celebrity gossip, for instance, and like she blocked everything from her computer so she couldn't look anymore. And part of it is just that like pattern of like that's what she would do when she was not knowing what to do. And so, you know, blocking it meant she had to find something different to do. So developing those boundaries that are really clear and then sticking with them, right? So behavior change takes 45 days to really successfully start rewiring our brain and our patterns. And so committing and saying for the next 45 days, I'm going to give myself X amount of time to look at X number of websites that I know are trusted. And then I'm going to actively say to myself, I'm done now, and put the devices down or turn the Wi-Fi off or turn the phone off. And then if you're in a shared space with someone who doesn't match those, you know, sharing that with that person and saying, those podcasts, it's not helping me. You have to put the headphones in. Does that sound like I might be speaking like personally? I am. Or like turn off the computer or move the computer to a space where it's not, you know, public in a shared space. So really developing kind of those self-care strategies in the same way that we do around choosing what we eat or choosing what we do physically, right? Like whether we color or we do a puzzle or ride a bike, the same way is just really setting that structure and sticking with it for a month and a half, 45 days, which should get you right up to November 2nd.
And there's a comment in the chat, so we'll go back up to the questions, but a person is saying that they use their Google Assist to set a morning routine that includes brief updates from my preferred news sources or podcasts. So we can use our technology both to kind of like turn it off, but we can also use it to kind of help moderate that space. Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of living with other things, my dog is now underneath my feet. So we're going to go back to back to the next question, unless if Carolyn, you want to add to that first question's. The dog is really not wanting to move. Okay.
Leave the dog there, Michael. It's okay.
Okay. All right. We're good. So second question is, I've been sleeping more and I hate it. I don't know why I'm doing it.
Carolyn, I feel like this is your jam.
Yeah, well, I I've got so many questions. So yeah, we find ourselves sleeping now, potentially. We're at home more. You have, for me personally, I live in a space where I can see my bed. And it's tempting, right? If you're sleeping more, you're finding yourself sleeping more, but you're not necessarily tired. Can be something that, and it sounds like you're expressing discontent with that you'd like to change that behavior. I would lean in the direction of setting similar boundaries as you do with your technology, setting boundaries around when you can, whether you sleep on the couch or sleep in a chair or wherever you might find yourself napping regularly, set boundaries around that, and see. So that might be, I can only be in this space from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. Something of that nature is something I tend to lean towards, very like black and white, where you can black and white kind of goals, if you will, where you can either achieve it or when you're not meeting that, you have to adjust it. That's to something a little bit more achievable. But if you're sleeping more, that could mean any sort of thing. It could be that your body needs sleep right now, and that can be very helpful for folks. It's not necessarily a bad thing. That's something to explore. So I've got a lot of questions. I don't know if this is the best platform to get into that, but that's definitely something to, if it's bothering you, again, around routine and making sure you get enough, but you're acknowledging that there's a fine kind of line there for you. So
I might even add a tool there of keeping a sleep journal for maybe a week or so, because it would be interesting to see how much, like, to reflect on how much you are sleeping actually, and how much maybe it's like downtime for you, where you might just be like, oh, and laying down just to like check out a little bit, which might actually be a really healthy coping strategy. And so keeping that journal would help you maybe understand what those patterns are, and if it's consistent, like if you are consistently napping every day at 2, or maybe you're consistently sleeping 10 hours without disruption, that can help give you some sense of what's happening with your whole body, and then also potentially the impacts that it might be giving you, or harm, maybe it's helping, maybe it's not, around your mental well-being.
Should we move to the next question? Which is, I have so many positive things going on in my life, but I still focus on the negative. I just love some suggestions on ways to try to focus on more positive things, even if just for a little while each day.
Love it. So you're going to think I'm cheesy, but I dare you to do it. Get yourself some Post-its and spend some time thinking about what those positive things are. Don't write yourself an essay. There it is. And every time one of those positive things comes up, slap it on a Post-it and then paper that space you're living in. Not to the point where every time you look in the mirror, there's like 45, right? Like the game here is that you put them in places that are random, that you will forget about. So when you open the underwear drawer, you're like, pow, this really great thing is happening. And you put one on your door, and just random places, because they turn into little whispers to you about what those positive things are that we forget about so easily. We take for granted. There's a lot happening around us. It's so easy to just not take a moment to reflect on those. And those little Post-its are like I said, little whispers that you can like ruminate on for just a second, and then you keep going on about your day, but it can help infiltrate and get itself in there and remind us that there are all those great things, because they're there.
I think another technique is that's a little bit different, is choosing to spend time. So for instance, something you do in the evening each night, brushing your teeth. While you're brushing your teeth, think of 3 great things from that day specifically and build on those. And what made you feel good about this specific situation? What did you accomplished today that you'd like to continue tomorrow. So align it with something that you do every day to make it a similar practice that will benefit you, that's part of your regular mental hygiene, if you will. That's another kind of idea.
Excellent. Another question is, it feels like things might be a little frustrations before this pandemic time were manageable over a couple of days, but now I have no reserves left and all frustrations linger and fester and make it harder to get on with it. Other suggestions for that?
Holy bananas, can I empathize?
Or there.
I think as a collective, we are there. It is such a hard time right now. Our capacity for all things is just shorter. I don't have any foolproof strategy for this. I experienced this as well. I have a couple different strategies that I use that are sometimes successful and sometimes not, and that's okay. That's what strategies are, right? You give it a shot. So I will literally get up and walk away from something, like in the middle of it, like mid-speech sometimes, which from the outside might look super rude, but it's really just an act of being like, oh, I'm physically letting go of this, and like physically walking up and like just letting it go. It's still going to be there when I come back, but just kind of that goes back to what we were talking about in the beginning with like shifting our physical space. Just sorry, this smoky sky is kicking me today. So that's one. I have attempted the practice of counting. I don't find that particularly helpful, but I know lots of people who do, whether it's counting backwards. I find counting backwards more helpful than counting forwards. There's some interesting studies about why that is. But I think the biggest thing we can do, and that I'd love to hear from Carolyn, is just having a moment of compassion, which is like, honestly, like saying to yourself, like, we are all with you. This is hard, and it is okay that our reserves are empty and that our limits are cut and we are doing the best we can. And saying that to yourself, like, I am doing the best I can, because nobody here isn't. And the best we can is really good enough. And the only time it's not is when we spend time beating ourselves up about what we're doing. And that's self-made, right? Mm-hmm. So just having that compassion and being like, I'm doing the best I can and I'm killing it. And I know that because I'm showing up and I'm doing it. And let that other self-negative talk that we all have go, which is sometimes what getting up and walking away from it is doing for me, where like, that's about me being like, oh, this should be better. Like, we're not doing that. I'm doing the best I can. We're all doing the best we can. We're going to get through this.
Yeah, I don't know, beyond all of that, just really reinforcing the idea that folks are experiencing it in different ways, but it is a brutal reality, and both having that and having radical self-compassion for yourself, all that Joanna had just said, that you're doing the best that you can. It is a radical choice to say and forgive yourself for getting up and leaving those shoulds behind. It's hard, and it's absolutely challenging for you, for me, for Joanna, for Michael at this time. And I really mirror what Joanna said.
I think this is a really great segue to the next question about, kind of keeping in mind that radical compassion, and it's really hard right now. So the next question is, I have a hard time figuring out what level of expectations I should have around myself, my spouse, my 10-year-old, regarding like care of the home, ourselves, care for each other. So all of those balancing.
I wonder if, after what we just talked about, if that person and I were sitting together and I said, are you doing the best you can? If that would reframe those expectations right there, right? Like, who tells us how our houses should be? Who tells us how our partners and us should interact? Who tells us how our 10-year-old should behave? For real, like I could have written that question. And I think it's more at this point about, are we safe? Are we as happy as we can be? Are we making space for joy? And forget the rest of the rules that we have all constructed for ourselves. Like, throw them out, because the rules for 2020 are gone anyway. And why should they exist in our houses and not for the rest of what we expected this year to look like? So going back, excuse me, to that reframe of like, are you doing the best you can? Are the people in your household doing the best they can? Is there something really specific that I need changed so that my physical or emotional well-being is better? Not globally, right? Like my example of, I need you to put the headphones in because your podcasts are making me anxious. That's a simple thing. That's an expectation I can name, and I can tell you what the outcome will be. I will feel better because I will not have to hear your podcasts. Okay. But globally, do I want to eat off my kitchen floor right now? Absolutely not. And I'm totally fine with it. When I have to lay down for my 10-minute checkout, I just don't lay on the kitchen floor. So that self-compassion and helping that kind of shape our homes and our interactions with the people in our lived spaces.
If I can add to that, one of the things that I used to say pre-COVID was that I could either have a clean house or change the world, and I couldn't do both. Not that I can change the world, but like, you know, I had things that I wanted to do, and that was more important to me than having a clean house. And I think post-COVID now, it's the same kind of mentality of like not having a clean house, but it's more about, do I have a house that I can live in and love in? And that's more important to me than having a clean house that I could live in and love in. So, I mean, it's just, you know, these things are just like, you know, where's the line? And yeah, my kitchen floor, I would not want to lay on it either, but my stove is going to be clean if I'm going to cook on it. You know what I mean? Like, that's my priority. So, and we can draw those lines wherever we need to. Carolyn, do you have something to add to that question?
No, nothing.
Okay, I should have taken that as a no.
Yeah,
So the
that.
next question, we probably have time for the majority of the rest questions. So the next question is, what are some ways to deal with procrastination?
So procrastination is a product of, it's a coping mechanism. Let's just recognize it as that. And coping mechanisms are amazing things that protect our brains. That doesn't mean that they're always healthy, but let's acknowledge what we're doing and why we're doing it. And so that's something like pretty big for lots of people, and lots of people want to improve that practice and like change that coping mechanism. But I think in the most immediate way, trying to do some self-reflection on what the purpose of procrastination, like what the core of it is. So for a lot of people, procrastination is around anxiety, not knowing what the outcome of doing that behavior will do, or not feeling comfortable thinking about what those things are that you're procrastinating. So I would start, and then I'm going to pivot to Carolyn, who probably has better things than I do to say about this, but just acknowledging that it is something that we do to protect ourselves, and name it that, right? Coping mechanisms are real. They're a good thing sometimes. Sometimes they get in our way, and we have them to keep us safe and alive.
Right, and it is around avoidance of those uncomfortable feelings around whatever that might be. And I think I would recommend, if able, take time and really examine that. And if you need be, if you're working, if it's around something work related and you're working with a partner, maybe check in with your colleague and say, you know, I can't do this. I don't know what, I don't know what's keeping me from doing it. Maybe checking in with someone else who is involved or not involved at all, and say, I'm having this anxiety about this. Can you help me process? That can be helpful for folks. to really kind of address what might be that barrier for you. And it'll be a different scenario for everything that you encounter, right? Like, I don't do my wash for a different reason than I'm worried about that deadline for that document that I have to finish. So it's an ongoing process that the more you kind of think about these things and review them or kind of detail them, the more that you'll understand yourself and your practices and your behaviors and kind of can make change in that way.
So the next couple are maybe more comments than questions. So the next one is, sometimes bed is just too cozy, maybe another cozy place elsewhere, like a comfy chair, a favorite spot for soothing tea, poetry, distress that isn't bed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's, I mean, I think that stands by itself, unless if you'd like to add some more to that.
Great.
And then another person is adding that, you know, on top of things, they're having health issues. So like, what kinds of things can folks do when they're having like these layers of things that they're dealing with?
Yeah, that can be really overwhelming for a lot of different reasons too, right? Like, now is not the time that lots of people feel like they want to go take care of health things if they can manage them, right? Like, entering healthcare places is not a place that lots of people are feeling happy or comfortable doing right now. And so I think what's really important though to say is, right, like, what is that line and balance? Like, what can be put off and what are like really important things where healthcare is needed now and it can be done safely. So I just want to put that out there. But I think, you know, for folks who just might have more chronic health issues or something that has been ongoing that they are addressing, but, you know, are still feeling crummy or are putting off safely, that's an added weight on our emotional well-being as well. And having someone to talk to about those things can be really important. You know, keeping a journal, a diary, what have you, about symptoms when things are happening, what you're experiencing, depending on what those health issues are, can be helpful in just sometimes not feeling overwhelmed by the level of things when we've got so many things coming at us. Being able to physically act, if you are able to actually write in cursive, that's a whole thing. It is the only kind of writing that uses both sides of your brain and can actually help reduce anxiety. So while you're writing things down, there's a lot of things that can do to help us just in terms of feeling like we have control over some of what's happening, whether it's symptoms or, you know, needs or appointments coming up, any of those things, just trying to feel like we have a little bit of control over what's happening.
Carolyn, did you want to add some more?
No, I'm just the idea of control what you can is resounding in my mind, so that is a broken record for me. Acknowledging what you can control and taking control of that, and yeah, that can build one's self-esteem, their wellness, their overall sense of self, I think.
And Joanna, I was thinking about the writing in cursive, and my 26-year-old, I don't think they taught cursive at that point in time. So like, some schools are not teaching that. And so I mean, that's a fascinating thing of like, you know, is our culture's mental health worse because we're not writing in cursive? I mean, it's, you know, I'm half joking about that, but what are the other things that we're missing out on?
Yeah, it's not really funny. And you're right, most schools aren't teaching it anymore. And it's like super interesting. It is the only form of writing that uses both the left and right side of our brains.
Does calligraphy, if somebody does calligraphy, or is that not quite the same? It's not the same.
I don't know. I would have to say the research I've read is around like the difference between typing, printing, and cursive, and what happens in our brains when we're doing those things.
Fascinating. There's one more question, and then can we do that and then wrap up for the night?
Yeah.
So it says, my partner keeps telling me that I'm burying my head in the sand because the number of areas where I say, I just can't think about this right now. Advice. It definitely feels like I'm doing the best I can and that it's a good coping strategy, but keeps making me feel like I'm doing something wrong.
So I think the way I hear that is that I'm having trouble with the question. So I guess there's two ways that I could hear that. I could hear that as my partner is making me feel like I'm doing something wrong by burying my head in the sand, or I'm beating myself up about the fact that I'm putting things off and saying I can't deal with that right now. So depending on which of those two things it is, one, I just want to say to everybody again, let's hear our self-talk and how we talk to ourselves and how we are socialized to talk to ourselves. And it's not very good. And so let's screw those rules and talk to ourselves with compassion and kindness. And so if that is your coping strategy of not focusing on certain things, I'm even going to take away like the negative connotation of burying my head in the sand, right? Like, let's just, if I'm choosing not to focus on those things and it's working for me and it's not disruptive to the rest of my life, then fine. Those things will still be there eventually. And let's just have some self-compassion. And I think that if some of that self-compassion is needed from a partner, I try really hard to reset things and remember that the people in our shared spaces are going through very similar things that we are, right? Like the struggles and the lack of self-compassion and the being trapped and all the things are happening for all the bodies around us. And we don't know how those things feel or look when they come out from other people. And so just reframing that, it doesn't mean that when somebody screams at you at a red light that that's appropriate because they're having a hard day, but just reframing that that's probably not about you, right? And so trying to take that step back and recognize that whatever's coming out of someone's mouth is coming through a filter that you have no idea what that looks like, even if you share a space with that person, and just reframing it for yourself, because that's what we can control is ourselves. I know it sounds generic, but some of that really is just like reshaping how we think, which is such a hard thing to do. But like throw on one of those Post-its that you're going to stick somewhere, like self-compassion, it's a thing, or right, like I rock, or yes, I'm doing it, or, you know, however you would speak to yourself, you know, find that area and that space to remind yourself that you're kicking it and you're doing a great job. It'll get in there somehow. We're going to get it into your brain to the point where you believe it, no matter how many times we have to do it.
Yeah.
Carol, you just go in the nod.
Yeah, no,
Nod.
I love the Post-it idea, just building this space of whispers that will fill my head all the time, right? I've got a few around, but I'm just imagining like plastered walls and self-statements.
And this question reminds me of my partner and I do some things when we do strategic planning together, and we've sometimes put little, we have like 4 or 5 note cards, which will say different things like take a break, or, you know, it'll give the cue so that we don't have to articulate it, because sometimes it's hard to say to somebody, you know, hey, I can't deal with what you've just said to me, or we cope differently. So we use little, you know, like basically like little Post-it notes, but they're note cards. And it's a way that we can communicate to each other. So I think that sometimes when people are living in the same spaces, sometimes in small spaces during COVID, how can we find ways of communicating that's not, if we can't communicate in our normal ways, like by talking? So, and I love the Post-it things too. So the little whispers. Beautiful. Thank you for being here tonight, folks that are joining us from afar. And thank you, Joanna and Carolyn, for making tonight a fun, interactive, hopefully not cross-talking event tonight, so that our interpreters can do a good job. So thanks everybody for being here. Bye, y'all.